Look, you're down on my list of open.
Good afternoon.
Other.
Yeah, we're just.
So I think Rebecca Alty.
Yeah, good. Just, I'll do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do what the high school teachers do.
Call the meeting to order. Very good.
Yeah.
And I think Rebecca and Julian Morse will be speaking.
Okay.
I think that's what she said.
All right. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a meeting for social development, and we have the City of Yellowknife making a presentation to Standing Committee Social Development. At this point in time, before we start, I'm going to ask Mr. Bolio to open up with a prayer.
Mr. Speaker, tu tiens tu allions dans chantesque ici by Astia. Heavenly Father, I pray today that we're able to use good judgment as we deal with this very important item for the territories, the Aurora College Foundational Review, and we get the opinions of the people from the City of Yellowknife and present that in front of the rest of the spectators here in Yellowknife. And with that, I'd like to just say I hope that we're able to do this with respect and dignity appropriate to the positions we all hold. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Bolio. So at this point in time, I'll ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, starting on my left. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, on my right. Sorry. Start on my right.
RJ Simpson, I'm the MLA for Hay River North. Welcome.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake. Thank you for coming, Julie Green, Yellowknife Center.
Yes, thank you for coming and welcome. Corey Van Thine, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Tom Bollier, MLA for Tunether-Williday.
Welcome, Frederick Blake, MLA for Mackenzie Delta.
Welcome, my name is Shane Thompson from the Hendy region. On my left is Megan Welsh, our research analyst. On our right is Gail Bennett. At this point in time, whom will be starting out? Mayor Alty? Or is it Mayor-elect Alty?
Thank you. And I'm joined today by Councillor Julian Morse, as well as Sheila Bassi-Kellett, SAO for the City of Yellowknife. And just like to turn it over to Julian for a second to introduce the Yellowknife's University Advisory Committee. Sorry, we've had the Aquatic Effects the Aquatic Center Advisory Committee as well this week. So mixing up my committees. Julian? Thank you,
Mayor-elect Alty. Mr. Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm a city councillor with the City of Yellowknife and also chair of the city's post-secondary advisory committee, many members of which I'm pleased to note are here today, and I'll just quickly introduce them. We have Dr. Jakob Adam, who is a former board chair with Aurora College. We have Dr. Roger Epp, who is the director of the University of Alberta North. We have José Clermont, who is the executive director of Collège Nordique. We have Jennifer Pitt and Lisa Giovanetto, both representing student interests on the committee. We have Dr. Kelsey Wrightson, who's representing Decinta Bush University, and we have Steve Ellis, who works with Tides Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. Mayor-elect Alty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're just going to take a moment to touch on some of the highlights from the report that we've provided. So first off, this is a great time for the GNWT to reassess and reinvent vision for post-secondary education in the Northwest Territories. We see great advantages in attracting students outside the Northwest Territories, global and competitive nature of post-secondary education. The NWT needs a long-term solution for higher education. And the GNWT can work with key partners to create that successful vision. Partners are here to help and support, which I think is shown today in the gallery. So the Aurora College Foundational Review Report. The city appreciates that the GNWT commissioned a review of Aurora College. The review presents a vision and path for the transformation of Aurora College over the next 6 years in looking at governance, accountability, academic programming, operations, and recruitment and retention of students. Aurora College is, as you know, established and guided by the Aurora College Act. However, Aurora College does not operate at arm's length. The Act does not allow for additional post-secondary institutions here in the Northwest Territories. The City supports amendments to the Act as outlined in the letter appended to our presentation. The City endorses universities being autonomous and engaging with private and public partners, and having the ability to set their own research and educational priorities. For accountability, it's vital that the GNWT establish a vision for post-secondary education. The vision will guide GNWT and partners in establishing a model that meets the needs of residents and communities across the North. For academic program management, academic programs need to focus on the future needs of the Northwest Territories with respect to labor market demands. It's important to consider unique opportunities for post-secondary education and research. We need a world-class curriculum customized to Northern realities and culture that incorporates the hospitality and customs of the NWT. The City supports a comprehensive review of all programming offered. In regards to operations, the foundational review recognizes that serving communities in the NWT is the core mandate of the college. A full review of all programs delivered by the college will inform the development of this new model. The City supports the report's recommendation to integrate the regional communities within overall planning. For recruitment and retention of students, this is critical to higher education and success in the NWT. The City is committed to working with partners to ensure successful student experiences, and the number of strategies and actions the City could take to support student experiences. For community consultations, interviews, surveys, focus groups were completed and recognized that an institution must evolve to reflect stakeholder and community needs. 8 of the 13 Indigenous governments and organizations interviewed were part of the report's process. And we think that continued engagement is vital to success. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Councillor Morse, and he'll touch on the review that the City is currently completing.
Thank you, Mayor-elect Alty. Mr. Morse.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to acknowledge that Catherine Lafferty, who also represents Dishinta University, has joined us. So where does the City play into this? Diversification of the economy is a key goal of the City of Yellowknife. It is also a key goal for the GNWT in Canada. The City has engaged Strategy Corp. Incorporated to develop a feasibility study to determine if the City can sustain a university or post-secondary institution. The City established the University Advisory Committee to build a coalition of expertise around enhanced academic development in the City and the North. I've already introduced the members of our committee who are in attendance, but as you can see, I think it shows a wide interest. I would just note that when we put out the call for this committee, where the City normally has trouble attracting people to serve on our committees, this committee was wildly popular, and we actually had to turn away more people than we were able to put on the committee. I think showing a large amount of interest from the public in the initiative that the City's pursuing. The feasibility study is being finalized, and I can share some of the preliminary findings that have been found by the consultants. The consultants noted that programming needs to be aligned with labor market needs. I would note that this was also noted by the territory's own economic diversification strategy. Draft findings confirm a strong argument for a polytechnic university as it is most aligned with the NWT's labor market needs. This can help drive the City's and the NWT's overall growth objectives. A polytechnic university can combine and align an array of partners to develop a collective approach. I would note that a number of institutions are already operating in the NWT and delivering programming, such as Dishinta, such as the University of Alberta, such as Collège Nordique. Not only does this speak to interest and demand for expanded options, but it could be an opportunity to develop a federated institution which incorporates these existing institutions and programs within it. For student recruitment and retention, there needs to be a focus on keeping students home and supporting local needs. At the same time, marketing efforts need to be directed to Southern and international students to achieve a student body that would be required to support such an institution. Costs will be a challenge. Housing affordability will be key to a successful post-secondary model. The city is prepared to work with developers and other partners to create affordable housing. The city is also committed to working with partners to establish student support such as daycare, mental health services, part-time employment, etc. Partners can be a part of this with the GNWT. For governance, a polytechnic institution needs academic independence and sound governance. Research and analysis supports a polytechnic institution as the most feasible path forward for the NWT. The current college model results in many missed funding and research opportunities. Federal research funding can have a positive impact on the GDP of the NWT. A university can increase economic activity. The vision that the GNWT develops will help to guide the GNWT and partners in establishing a model which meets the needs of residents and communities across the North. I would also encourage the GNWT to also consider the opportunities which would be captured by the territory if a world-class institution is established, which also attracts Southern and international students. As I noted previously, economic diversification is a goal of this assembly, and yet currently the opportunities associated with expanding post-secondary in the territory are being missed. A perfect example of this is that just this August, the federal government granted Quebec $25 million towards the Institut Nordique de Quebec from the New Building Canada Fund. Significant public and private funding is available in this country for investment into post-secondary institutions, especially those with a northern focus. So, some recommendations from the city and stemming from the feasibility study. The GNWT needs to establish a vision for higher education. The NWT must make the knowledge economy a priority and establish a vision of higher education which will bring us into the 21st century. GNWT must lead this effort in collaboration with key partners, including the city. Develop a clear and consistent vision for all post-secondary education in the NWT. We believe that this will enhance economic opportunities. A polytechnic university will provide the opportunity to capture additional Northern and Arctic research dollars, as I previously noted. Amending legislation is also needed. The Aurora College Act must be revised to remove the overriding control by the Department of Education and Culture and Employment. This will set the groundwork to permit development of a Northern Polytechnic University. I think that the city believes that we need to plan creatively for the required infrastructure that will be needed. The GNWT must consider capital requirements of setting up a university or polytechnic in the NWT in relation to existing and future infrastructure. Potential opportunities exist that can leverage the required physical space with partners in Yellowknife. In conclusion, we feel that changes must be made to transform Aurora College into a polytechnic university that will meet the diverse educational needs of the NWT and beyond. A fresh, innovative northern approach is needed to support current and future students in developing skills to meet future labor market demands. The city's vision is that the new model will support NWT students to a new level of academic achievement at home, but also provide a destination institution offering unique made-in-the-North programming and research opportunities. Do you want to close?
Thank you, Mr. Morse. Anything further, Mayor-elect Alty?
No, thank you very much, sir.
Okay, I thank you for the presentation. Committee, any questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to be clear. I believe you said that you believe in the establishment of a polytechnic university as outlined in the foundational review. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson.
I know that's
right. Mayor-elect Alty.
Thank you. And over at the city, we have to control it ourselves. No, that is correct. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor-elect Alty. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess the most controversial part of this is basically moving the headquarters from Fort Smith to Yellowknife. And I was wondering, what's the crux of your argument for that move, which will essentially, develop the university here and, possibly cause, some withering in Fort Smith? What advantages do you see Yellowknife having over Fort Smith that require the university to be set up in this city. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Mr. Morse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question. To a certain extent, I think that it's not necessarily the city's place to be answering that question on the GNWT's behalf. I think that the Aurora College Foundational Review speaks for itself to a certain extent. Also, the city is, as we've noted, been pursuing a economic feasibility study, which we haven't yet received the final version of, but we'll be able to provide to the Assembly once it's done. And I think that that will help provide a foundation for a case. I mean, ultimately, something that I've said as a councillor is that certainly Yellowknife is not looking to position itself against Fort Smith in any way. And I don't believe that it would be to the benefit of the territory to have Fort Smith be hurt by the establishment of an institution. The message that I think is important to deliver here is that the college in its current form is missing opportunities, as we've noted. I think that you'll see that in other jurisdictions where they have invested in creating an institution which does meet world-class standards, that those institutions have a tendency to grow, and the spin-off opportunities that come out of those institutions can expand to entire regions. So I would encourage the GNWT in looking at this holistically, that they consider the impacts that such an institution, if it were to grow, and looking at what it might be 20 years from now. If you look at other jurisdictions, the benefits extend far beyond the main city in which the institutions are developed. And, you know, a perfect model is our next door neighbors in Yukon College, which has its main campus located in Whitehorse, but that certainly is not the full extent of the college. It extends throughout the communities in the Yukon. So that is to a certain extent already the case with Aurora College. And yeah, just to sum up, I think that the concerns brought forward by Fort Smith are certainly legitimate, and it's a challenge that the GNWT needs to overcome. But I would encourage you to think of this on a larger scale, on a holistic scale, and in such a way that you consider all of the impacts that could happen, and to just understand that what we're advocating for is something that is much bigger than what the Aurora College is currently.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. Mr. Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and that's what I'm advocating for as well. That's why I called for a foundational review. I've made multiple statements in the House about this, that we need a vision, and you know, education is vital. I mean, the one common denominator across all prosperous societies is education. And the issue is, and I can see a scenario where, you know, the university is centered here, and Fort Smith is also doing very well because, you know, the university expands and there's great programs in other regions. But, you know, you guys are here to sell us on the idea of the university being centralized in Yellowknife. And so I mean, it's more expensive to build here. There's all sorts of these issues, and so I was just wondering what Yellowknife has to offer above Fort Smith that we should, you know, consider moving the university, or centering this university in Yellowknife. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Okay, Mr. Morse?
Thank you very much. Again, I did want to emphasize that we're not here to try and position ourselves against Fort Smith in any way. I would note that the foundational review itself makes note of the importance of the regional centers as part of this plan. And certainly the review itself notes Fort Smith and notes Inuvik as being an important part of this plan going forward. And as you've said yourself, you know, an organization that starts to attract more students, I think, will end up benefiting Smith in the end either way. In terms of what the city can offer, I mean, I think that we spoke to that to a certain extent in our presentation, but there is a lot of infrastructure here. There are a lot of services located here. I mean, when we look at what the city has to offer, we have organizations that are already operating here. There's student experience to be considered. There's a large amount of services which are offered here, which students may not be able to access in a smaller community. I wonder if, Sheila, if you want to speak to that a little bit as well.
Thank you, Ms. Morse. Ms. Bassett?
Thank Thank you very much. Certainly in the work that we're doing, as Councillor Morse and Mayor-elect Alty have said, we're not here to pit ourselves and say we're better than anybody else, but we do see that when it comes to the economies of scale, to having a university and a post-secondary, a polytechnic institution, that there is the diversity that Yellowknife brings to the table in terms of the amenities, the resources, opportunities for student employment. We certainly recognize that student housing is a key issue. We know that. We've heard that loud and clear. We know that Smith currently, of course, has housing that's set up for students. However, we do realize that there are great opportunities here where the city of Yellowknife sees a role that we can play. We certainly are not taking a leadership role in terms of saying that we will be building a university. That has been asked of the city, and we want to be very, very clear that what we can bring to the table are things that will make the student experience and the academic experience overall so much more robust. The capital city right now is the crossroads for so many people. We know of so much research that's going on completely across the territory right now where worlds all align in Yellowknife, and whether or not it's some of the Indigenous research on health through organizations like Hoditseda that have brought in an enormous amount of research dollars based here and located throughout the regions as well. We do know that there's an extensive network that the city of Yellowknife has the size and magnitude to be able to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bassi-Kellett. Any other questions for Mr. Van Thun?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you for coming and presenting today. These can be exciting times, both for our government as well as for the municipality and for the territory as a whole, not just the capital city. There's a lot of work to be done as it relates to a number of initiatives in improving our educational system. But certainly I'm of the opinion that we have reached a point in time, and especially with the expectations we're putting on ourselves with regard to the future, that in order to meet some of those expectations, we're going to need and require advanced education. That said, I want to recognize and appreciate the efforts that the advisory committee has done. I think this is very good information. But I would also like to see, and I recognize there's an economic feasibility study that is yet to come forward. The city, in terms of its operations and its various departments, has a lot to offer, in my view, in supporting the potential for a polytechnic university in many ways, but in particular as it relates to things like land. We talk about partnering for housing, but I think the city would really have to establish a position on housing if in fact we were looking at a bricks and mortar version of a polytechnic university coming here. There's a whole different culture around small business and economic opportunities when you're a university or a college town. And I think that the city would really have to give some consideration to how small business incubation is going to look. Given that we've watched our city's small business basically disappear in many aspects, in the downtown in particular in recent years. That leads me then to talk about where the city's role would be as it relates to helping to overcome many of the systemic challenges that we're faced with. Those are things that I appreciate that both of our governments have put in a lot of time and resources into. But the efforts that have been, the progressive efforts that have been taken to date, we certainly don't want to see them take any kind of backseat with regard to now putting our priorities, our resources, and our finances in another area. I think we got to continue to take the necessary measures, steps and measures to make sure that the systemic issues that we're suffering, in particular in the downtown of Yellowknife, don't become exacerbated because we're building a polytechnic university of some kind. That then too leads to downtown revitalization. The city of Yellowknife has been talking about versions of revitalization in downtown for a number of years. We need this, and certainly a polytechnic university could be the cornerstone piece that we've been long looking for to base that revitalization around. And so while I appreciate the efforts of the committee and the report, it's those kinds of pieces that would be looking for from the city if at any point in time the government decides that they are going to actually go forward with something like this, and that the city of Yellowknife would be the center for a polytechnic university. I think that, ideas around land, housing, small business incubation, overcoming systemic issues, and downtown revitalization has got to be those corner pieces that you're going to be able to show the government in the Northwest Territories that you are doing and capable of doing, of which you are. Those are your things. You're doing great things in those areas already, but how they specifically tie in to an undertaking such as this would be something that I would be looking for coming forward from the city. But I really appreciate what you've presented here today. I think it's an outstanding good start, and there's a lot of great things in here for us as regular members and the government to give consideration to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Van Thyn. Mayor-elect Alty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the comments, Mr. Van Thyn. Yes, and if the GNWT does accept the review and looks to move forward, we hope to work very closely with the GNWT on that. Right now, we're going through our community plan update. So it is that perfect timing as well to look at those questions of land, and if you're looking to go with a new location, what that looks like, the housing requirements, how many students the facility, the university would be looking about the ballpark. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and we're very eager to be part of those discussions going forward.
Thank you, Mayor-elect Alty. Mr. Van Thyn? No. Ms. Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming and making your presentation. My question is what you think the Yukon College model has to teach the NWT. What are the key lessons there? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Mr. Morse?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That one, I think something to note about the Yukon College, and a comment that I was going to make sort of maybe as a closing comment, but I did want to kind of emphasize to the committee that I think something that I felt was captured in the foundational review was sort of a sense of urgency that now is the time to establish kind of a grander vision for education in NWT. And I think the reason that recommendation came forward is because if you look at other jurisdictions that have established such a vision, jurisdictions which have invested in this, probably the most notable one is the University of Tromsø in Norway. And I'm not sure if you're aware of that. And I'm sorry, this is a bit of a roundabout answer. I will get to Yukon College in a second. But the situation there was Tromsø was a town similar to the size of Yellowknife, about 20,000 people in the 70s, and their mining industry was declining. And the Norwegian government established as a vision for that community that they would establish a northern university to build up the economy. In the past 40 years, that university has grown to employ 1,200 people. They have tens of thousands of students from around the world, and the entire economy of that community is built up around the university. So that's the impact that a grand vision towards education can have. Certainly, it takes time to build something like that, and I think that something could happen incrementally. If you look at what's happening in the Yukon right now, they have gotten behind a vision. And if you look at the economic impact report that the Yukon College produced several years ago, you'll see that Yukon College is now in a place where they are moving towards university status. Yukon College is increasing employment in the communities. Yukon College is attracting students. They're attracting international students. And they're attracting students from our region as well. And they've established a model which is growing. And I think it's really interesting to note that Yukon College is now in a position where close to half of their funding is actually coming from private industry and private means. So it's interesting to note that as an institution like this grows, its dependence on public funding actually shrinks over time because investment starts to take over. And so I think it's important when looking at Yukon College to note that that college is now costing the territorial government less money than Aurora College costs this territorial government. And so I think Yukon College is an example of the opportunity that the territory is currently missing out on by not having a grander vision for post-secondary education in NWT. Do you feel that that answers your question sufficiently, Ms. Green?
Thank you, Mr. Morse. Ms. Green?
Thank you. No, not really, but I don't think I asked the right question, so I'm going to ask a different question. What role did Whitehorse play in the development of Yukon College to bring it to the state that it's at now?
Thank you, Ms. Green. Mr. Moore, or Mayor-elect Alty?
I think we'd have to look into that and get back to you.
Thank you, Mayor-elect Alty. Ms. Green?
Yeah, thank you. I guess what I'm trying to sort out is many of these issues are territorial government level issues. Not that having an enthusiastic partner with the city is a bad idea at all. But I think that there needs to be some clarity around who has what role in moving this forward. And so I just wondered how they had sorted that out in the Yukon. I mean, obviously Whitehorse would have been in favor of having an enhanced college there, but I wonder what exactly they did. Is that something that will be addressed in the feasibility study, what the city's role can be in this development? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Mr. Morse?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. I can't speak with very much backing behind what's going on in Whitehorse and the role that they've played, but I can speak to what the city's feasibility study was envisioning and the reason why the city's gotten behind this idea. It's important to note that when council approved the feasibility study, the Aurora College Foundational Review had not yet been released. And so we were acting in a situation where there wasn't a lot of leadership happening on this file. And so we were looking at the possibilities that are coming from private institutions which are coming to us and saying, we want to open up schools here, we want to open up programming here. That includes the University of Alberta North, that includes College Nordique, we have Deshinta. So these are all organizations that we've been talking to that are trying to establish programming with varying levels of success and varying levels of support from the territory. So that was the context in which we approved the feasibility study. Of course, that context changed somewhat, quite significantly actually, when the Aurora College Foundational Review came out. But speaking to what the feasibility study is looking at, in reviewing the draft, what the feasibility study is looking at is ways that the city can support such an initiative. The Post-Secondary Advisory Committee met with the consultants recently, and this was a question that I actually asked directly of the consultant, is it normal for a municipality to get involved in development of an educational institution? And the answer from the consultant was absolutely. And he noted that about a decade ago, there was a number of municipalities in Ontario that were looking to diversify their economies and answer a lot of the questions that the city is currently looking at answering as well. And many of them got behind the potential for post-secondary to be transformative of an economy. And so the message from the consultant to us is that it is something that cities get involved in. The reason that a city would get involved is because of the economic spin-off that comes from an institution. I mean, there's employment involved. There's the economic spin-offs associated with attracting students into the community who live there, who buy groceries, who patronize the shops and populate most likely the downtown. So as MLA Vanthine noted, such an institution could ultimately be an anchor tenant and be transformative for the downtown of Yellowknife. So I think that there's a lot of reasons why the city is interested in this, and that forms the basis for why council ultimately approved the post-secondary feasibility study.
Thank you, Ms. Morse. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation today. I think everybody recognizes that there were problems with the Aurora College Foundational Review, whether you're from Fort Smith, Yellowknife, or Inuvik. I'm pleased to see that the city has found ways to engage Deshinta and College Nordic in the work that you folks are doing. Just a couple of quick points I want to make. The largest single private donation to a university in Canada was Stu Blusson, who was one of the guys who found the diamond mine, $60 million to UBC. That money should have been coming here. Secondly, I was in Akureyri, the second largest city in Iceland, 19,000 people a few years ago. They have a university. There are Canadian students at that university because they can't study in Canada. The sort of things that they want to do. They have students from the circumpolar world there. So in any event, I think what the Aurora College Foundational Review has done is served as a catalyst for this necessary discussion on post-secondary education renewal in the Northwest Territories. We need to have that debate discussion, and I think GNWT needs to lead that, but I think the city's input is going to be quite welcome with that. What I think is one of the key issues, and I haven't heard anybody talk a lot about that here today, is childcare. And so I want to know whether this is something your committee's going to look into, because I think childcare is a huge barrier for our own students. So is that something that your committee and the feasibility study is going to look at? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Mr. Morse.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think something like childcare, student supports is going to be addressed indirectly through the economic feasibility study, but it's not something that is going to be addressed in detail. I did want to note something, and it was in response to one of the comments made by MLA Simpson. I would note that we're not necessarily here to say that the foundational review is perfect by any means. We're here to support kind of the overarching message, and I think that you captured it well, Mr. O'Reilly, in just saying that this is an important conversation. I think I would state that this conversation is well overdue at the territorial level, and so the city is inserting itself in the conversation insofar as this is an interest that the city has for the reasons that I just gave in response to Ms. Green's question. So, yeah, by all means, I think that several different interests have kind of highlighted some flaws with the report, but I would, encourage the committee and the territorial government to not necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater. Regardless of whatever flaws may occur in the report, it's still an incredibly important discussion that needs to happen. And, the benefits that we've been trying to highlight, and I think would be highlighted in a deeper look into what post-secondary renewal could do for the territory, it's absolutely essential. And I think I would encourage the territorial government to dig deeper into this, to go beyond the foundational review and really look at establishing and implementing a vision for post-secondary renewal in the territory.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Any other questions? Ms. Green.
Just a couple of things to mention. One is that the minister plans to table the and there's a technical briefing for the media this afternoon, to table the government response to the Aurora College Foundational Review tomorrow. So that'll give you some insight into their take on the report. And there was a discussion paper that came out earlier this year on post-secondary education. And usually the form for that is that the discussion paper is followed by legislation, and we're hoping to see that in the life of this assembly. And so there are lots of opportunities to discuss this issue and for the city to make its views known on what role it should have. And then just finally, the committee, this committee is very interested in the Yukon College transformation. And so I think that we're going to arrange to directly with them to get more information about how that was accomplished so that we understand what the possibilities are for us copying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Mayor-elect Ms. Alty.
Thank you, and I just draw to your attention the last page of the report is our letter back to Minister Moses and our position on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor-elect Alty. Any other questions, comments? Mr. O'Reilly.
Sorry, I neglected to ask, the feasibility study, when is that going to be finished? And when do you think you'll be able to provide it to regular MLAs and our cabinet colleagues as well? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Ms. Sheila Bassi-Kellett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We have a final draft that we're awaiting from our consultants right now, which we'll bring back to the University Advisory Committee, and then, of course, it will come to council, and we anticipate having it to council and out in the realm of the public by probably the middle of November. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bassi-Kellett. Any other comments or questions? Okay, Mr. Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Something I just wanted to highlight in closing, we've kind of touched upon the initiatives that are already taking place in the NWT, and I think it's exciting to note that these initiatives are taking place to a certain extent despite the efforts of the territorial government. And something that was brought forward as a suggestion by the committee is that the importance needs to be stressed on the independence of such an institution from the government to a certain extent, and I think that was raised as a concern by the community of Fort Smith and many people within the college, that one of the things holding the college back is that it's been treated much like a government department as opposed to a true post-secondary institution, which I think to be respected as an accredited organization needs to be independent of government, because one of the roles that a university plays in a community, of course, is study and potentially criticism of a government. The other thing that I would note that may have gotten lost within the presentation is just the opportunity for the potential of a federated model. And what that would mean is a model that is not necessarily standalone, that it brings together existing efforts such as Deshinta, such as Collège Nordique, and such as the programming that the University of Alberta has been putting together. And of course, Wilfrid Laurier University is establishing a presence here as well. Having a federated model would allow for the investment of outside organizations, and I think it would allow for a much broader offering of programming, because you'd have the support of southern institutions that are much bigger, that can provide things like master's and doctoral programming. So that's my last comment. Do you have any closing comments?
Mr. Morse. Last word, Mayor-elect Alty.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come speak to Standing Committee today. We do look forward to seeing the report tomorrow. And if members have any follow-up questions, by all means, feel free to contact one of us, and we'd be happy to answer that.
Thank you, Mayor-elect Alty. I'd like to also thank you and your staff and our audience here today. So thank you very much. At this point in time, we will adjourn the meeting, and members can get ready for our session.